We've got more information about the 3 U.S. soldiers that were killed in a drone strike in Jordan a couple days ago, as well as possible U.S. responses in the region. A new report talks about how Hamas is manipulating the data presented by the Gaza Health Ministry, and Israel conducted a targeted raid in a hospital in the West Bank, killing 3 Hamas militants. So let's get into it. I'm recording this at 9:30 a.m. Central on Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. So 2 days ago, news came out that a U.S. base in Jordan called Tower 22 was targeted and struck with a drone. The result of that strike was 3 U.S. soldiers killed and as many as 40 wounded. That wounded number continues to rise as more and more service members from the base undergo treatment and are screened for things like TBI. The names of the fallen have now been released by the Pentagon. They were all members of the Army Reserve 718th Engineer Company. We have Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, and Specialist Brianna Moffett. Again, the wounded number in that attack is around 40. It sounds like everyone else is in stable condition, so it wouldn't look like, as we're reporting right now, that the number of killed would increase. But again, 3 killed in that attack, as many as 40 U.S. service members wounded. There was a little confusion about the location of this strike. I addressed it in the previous video. And I saw a lot of comments yesterday talking about how this event took place in Syria. Tower 22 is in Jordan. It always has been. And we have had troops in Jordan for a long, long time. There's a long-standing relationship there between the United States and Jordan. It sounds like, I saw some notes on this where the Jordan government came out right out the gate and said there were attacks launched, carried out inside of Syria, kind of suggesting for political reasons that this U.S. base was not, inside of their territory, was not under attack. And you can see why Jordan wouldn't want to put out in the public that they are housing foreign service members, and those foreign service members come under attack in their country. You can see how that would play out. Additionally, with the amount of pressure on the United States and Israel across the Middle East, I think Jordan is trying to probably downplay the fact that they have a continued relationship with the United States. Either way, the attack took place in Jordan, likely launched from Syria, and we have a little more information on what might have happened in that case. So there are initial reports, wait for more information to come out on this, but initial reports suggest that this drone likely launched from the Islamic resistance in Iraq somewhere inside of Syria, followed a U.S. drone back to Tower 22 where it landed. That's the rumor. And the idea here is that as the U.S. drone was moving back towards the base, assets on the ground were able to identify that as a friendly aircraft. Don't shoot, let it come in. And this enemy drone kind of tailed that and drifted in undetected. That's the story right now. Of course, that raises the question of, was it just pure luck, or was it a vulnerability that was leveraged by the Islamic resistance in Iraq? The smart move here is to lean on the latter and to say that this was a vulnerability, a crack in the armor, and our enemy was able to exploit it. I think it's safer going forward, assuming, again, these groups are smart, they're capable, they're flexible. They have adapted to this battlefield as it's changed over the last 20 plus years. The best assumption here is that they identified this gap in our coverage, were able to exploit it, and hopefully U.S. forces in the region and around the world are able to close that up. Now, we still haven't seen a direct claim of responsibility for this attack. Again, the Islamic resistance in Iraq talked about conducting multiple strikes against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria the day that this took place. That is likely the culprit here. That is just, they're the ones who have been attacking U.S. forces across the region for a couple months now. Now, the likely culprit, if you have to dial it into one of these groups, is probably Hakarat Hezbollah al-Nujaba or Kataib Hezbollah. Those are kind of the 2 most prominent, most capable groups that fall under this Islamic resistance in Iraq. These are both, along with all of the groups in that organization, Iranian-backed militias, part of this overall, as they call themselves, the Axis of Resistance. Now, in looking at what the U.S. response is going to be here, again, something we talked about in yesterday's video, I'll provide a little more context here. There's kind of 3 levels to keep an eye out for. As of this recording at 9:30 a.m. Central on Tuesday, January 30th, I have not seen that the U.S. has conducted a response in any way. The 3 things that I think we should keep an eye out for: 1 is striking the location of where those drones came from. So the launch site, maybe the facility that they were stored in, that's level 1. Going to knock that out. Level 2 then would be striking some of these militia leaders across the region. So leadership figures, in this case, if they find out that they were members of Kataib Hezbollah, you go after the leadership of Kataib Hezbollah. If you find out it was launched by Hakarat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, you go after leaders from that organization. That's kind of the second level there. The third level would be the U.S. striking IRGC Iranian targets across Syria and Iraq. Just based off some of the conversations I'm seeing in the public domain, it seems like that is becoming increasingly more likely. I have seen some conversation about striking Iranian naval assets in the region. That seems like an extra step. It's hard to tell, right? There's a lot of different directions this could go. The tit-for-tat move here would likely be striking the militia leaders, the Syrians or the Iraqis that fall under this Islamic resistance in Iraq. That would be the tit for tat. The question that we have that remains to be answered is the United States going to step beyond that and try to show Iran and their proxies in the region that you got to stop and try to put forward some sort of de-escalation, if you will, to prevent them from carrying these attacks out in the future. So I've got a trip coming up. Well, technically it's next fall, but I'm starting to get ready for it now. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's a bunch of old Army buddies that I was in Afghanistan with. We haven't seen each other in a long time. We're going to do a camping and hunting weekend in Southern Illinois during next deer season. The problem is all of the camping that I've done, if you want to call it that, has been with the Army over the last 10 years, which isn't really camping. It's more just like being uncomfortable outside and not sleeping hardly at all. So that's not the plan. That's not what we're going for. So to get everything ready, I'm heading over to Scheels, the sponsor of this video. Look, Scheels has a ton of premium brands, price match guarantee, which is hard to beat. So if you're a hunter, a fisher, if you like hiking, camping, or anything outdoors, or if you're just trying to make a fun camping trip, not remind you of cold dirt floors in the middle of Afghanistan, Scheels is your place to go. Get all that stuff set up and check out the link in the description below to check out everything that Scheels has to offer. So a new report just came out in the Washington Institute talking about how Hamas is manipulating fatality figures that are being presented by the Gaza Health Ministry, which I feel like we've heard everything at this point about the Gaza Health Ministry data, right? No matter where you fall on this issue, you can certainly find a source, a reputable source, talking about, either it is reliable, it's not reliable, or anything in between. What this article gets at here, and why I thought it was interesting, is they do not argue against the overall numbers that the Gaza Health Ministry is presenting. Instead, they say that Hamas has been manipulating this data to downplay the number of militants killed and to exaggerate the proportion of non-combatants confirmed as dead. So they do start out their analysis by saying none of this presented here diminishes the scale of the human tragedy in Gaza since Hamas sparked the war with Israel in October 2023. It is unprecedented for residents of the coastal enclave, the Gaza Strip. So what they looked at here was, for starters, talking about how accurate the Gaza Health Ministry has been in past conflicts. They said that it usually tracks, unfortunately, there are a lot of examples here because there's been a lot of fighting in Gaza in recent years. They said, for the most part, the Gaza Health Ministry, and we've got the graph here, has generally tracked very, very closely with estimates from the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, as well as Israeli estimates. So if you're talking about how accurate the Gaza Health Ministry data is, this is one of the things to point to. There you go. Unfortunately, they say that this time, international organizations and non-governmental organizations cannot verify the death count in real time. They're not on the ground. The people that they need inside of Gaza to do this are not there. In turn, they have not attempted to distinguish between civilian and combatant fatalities. In some of the examples they list out here, they say that on October 26th, and I think a lot of you will remember this, the Gaza Health Ministry published a list of names, of 7,028 names that they say had been killed. They gave their names, identification numbers, ages, and genders. That report was made public. I think I published it here, I at least showed it here, and made it across multiple media outlets. It was really big news. I think this came just a day or two after U.S. President Biden said that the Gaza Health Ministry data was not reliable. So this was a big report. The president of the U.S. says not reliable, and then the next day you got names, ages, and ID numbers of all of the people, the 7,000 plus people who had so far been killed. This study ran through all of that data, and they said the weakness in this data, as in previous reports, involved the health ministry's failure to distinguish civilians versus combatants killed, or deaths as a result of Israeli actions versus Palestinian militant actions, whether in the course of combat or by failed rocket launches that are falling back into Gaza. They say at this point, Israel has said that as many as 2,000 rockets have failed to exit Gaza airspace and have impacted inside of Gaza's territory. That's not insignificant. That is not as many rockets falling back to earth as Israeli airstrikes there have been. I feel like I just stumbled over that really bad. That's nothing compared to the total number of Israeli airstrikes that have occurred in the Gaza Strip, but 2,000 rockets falling inside of a densely populated area is going to lead to some casualties. So what they're calling out here is that is just completely ignored and not mentioned who is producing those casualties. They have a couple other interesting aspects here that I'll throw up at some images that came out of the study. They said in a couple cases, they found that the number of male fatalities decreased from one day to the next. Fewer male deaths the next day than there were the day prior. To get to that number, it's based off of the Gaza Health Ministry giving total deaths and then backing out the total number of women and children that are killed. So if you see a lot of the one that comes through Al Jazeera that I've used a lot in the past, it has the total number of Gazans killed, and then it lists out the number of women and the number of children. So what they did is they pulled those out and they say, well, this is the number of men killed. And according to their study, that number has decreased a couple times since the war began. They also showed that the percentage of women and children killed went up after the ground invasion began, which feels off. Prior to the ground invasion, when Israeli forces moved into Gaza, there were bombs falling all across Gaza at all hours of the day for days on end. The volume of those strikes has died down substantially, a lot. There are still airstrikes occurring in Gaza. It is nothing right now like it was in the days and weeks immediately following the October 7th attacks. This data that they're putting forward, however, suggests that those Israeli soldiers conducting raids, clearing building after building in these tunnel networks, have somehow been targeting more Palestinian women and children in their clearance operations. Not just targeting, but killing more Palestinian women and children in these clearance operations than men, let alone militants. Haven't really seen that. That's not really been the footage. If you think about the footage that's come out of the tragedy of women and children and civilians that are killed in Gaza, it's almost always as a result of bombs falling, which makes sense, right? You can be less precise in that than a raid that moves down into a tunnel. It's hard to see a situation where the ground operation, the clearance operation of Israeli forces moving house to house, tunnel to tunnel, has resulted in a spike in women and children being killed and a notable decrease in the number of men and enemy combatants being killed. And then in wrapping up, they say in the current war, the Gaza Health Ministry and GMO, Government Media Office, have regularly downsized the male death count, and the general pattern of statistics shows an improbably low proportion of deaths among males, who presumably would be dying in at least their demographic proportions, if not more, due to their role in ground fighting. So what they're kind of getting at there is the percentage of deaths across this entire population is the number of men who have been reported killed by the Gaza Health Ministry is lower than the percentage of men that made up the population prior to the war kicking off, which is surprising in a lot of ways. But anyways, their analysis here, what they're putting forward is that Hamas or organizations friendly with Hamas, individuals friendly with Hamas, are manipulating that casualty data, specifically the fatality information, number of deaths coming out of Gaza, to make it seem like more innocent civilians are being killed and fewer militants have so far died. Then turning to operations on the ground, not much out of Hamas in the last couple days. They've been pretty quiet, just claimed 5 attacks against Israeli forces in the past 2 days. Israel, on the other hand, said that in Khan Yunis, they've raided hundreds of locations tied to Hamas infrastructure, including a battalion headquarters, training compounds, communications posts, command centers, and military intelligence building, a significant rocket manufacturing facility, and offices of Hamas senior officials, including Yahya Sinwar. They say so far, again, Israel says so far hundreds of tunnel shafts have been located and destroyed, some leading to significant strategic Hamas tunnels. Additionally, hundreds of Hamas militants have so far been eliminated underground in both close quarters combat and airstrikes. So we've talked about it before, but the intensity of the fighting in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza is significant. It has become much more close quarters. As mentioned here, we've started to see footage of Hamas fighting in the tunnels underground. Wasn't as much of that coming out up north. So while the area that Israel is clearing is technically getting smaller and smaller, the intensity of the fighting continues to increase. Then earlier today, we got information about a raid that Israel conducted into a hospital in the West Bank. the nature of that. Military and police forces conducting a raid and killing people inside of a hospital is going to make top headlines all around the world, and it did. So we'll bring up what we know so far. According to a joint statement by the IDF, Israel's counterterrorism police forces and the Shin Bet, their domestic security agency, they said they conducted a raid into the Ibn Sina hospital in the West Bank, where they found and killed Hamas member Mohammed Jalamna, along with, apologies for that pronunciation, along with 2 other Hamas militants who were hiding alongside him in the hospital. They say Jalamna was a resident of Jenin who had held direct communications with Hamas leadership abroad and was responsible for transferring weaponry and ammunition to Hamas militants across the West Bank for shooting attacks against Israelis. There was some crazy footage that came out showing this, where the Israeli forces entered the hospital dressed as doctors and nurses and then conducted the operation once they were inside. This was captured on some CCTV footage. Then Palestinian sources said that the disguised special forces, quote, infiltrated the hospital individually, headed to the 3rd floor, and assassinated the young men, citing sources from inside the hospital. It does not sound like there was a small arms engagement, for what it's worth, or if the Hamas member tried to engage Israeli forces. Doesn't sound like Israel suffered any casualties, and it doesn't sound like there were any other casualties in the hospital. So that's a positive here. Then according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, they condemned the raid, saying, quote, this crime comes after dozens of crimes committed by the occupation forces against treatment centers and crews. International law provides general and special protection for civilian sites, including hospitals. From the beginning of this war, especially since the beginning of the ground invasion into Gaza, hospitals and medical facilities have become a very hot button issue for good reason. So I thought it was notable here. In this case, it seems like a small targeted raid. The rest of the hospital appears to still be functioning and operational. But again, something that's going to get a lot of attention, going to be top of headlines in a lot of publications today. So figured it was worth, at the very least, bringing up. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out my Substack. Link is in the description below. We've just started bringing some people on board, putting out more detailed articles on topics that kind of supplement what I'm talking about in these videos. They're all free if interested. I think February 1st, we're looking at 2 to 3 new articles coming out every week. Give them a read. I think it's going to be a lot of value and should be really helpful, again, if you're interested in this kind of thing. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.